All right. Well, good morning. Um, my name is Gilbert, and it is a treat to be able to be a part of what we're doing right now. Um, so, a little bit about me. I did teacher training with Your Yoga Flow in 2015 in December in Bali, and that was my 200-hour training. And then in April of 2017, I did the supplemental 300-hour training, and that was also in Bali. Um, and since then, um, I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, and yeah, I've been teaching yoga full time. I started teaching in 2017, later on that year, once I got back from the 300-hour training. And basically, since late spring, summer of 2018, I've been teaching yoga full time. And most of the classes that I teach are power flow classes. So, um, and since then, I've taught a little over 2,000 classes, so which has been a lot. And the more popular form of yoga in the area seems to be power flow. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Hey, Mark, glad to have you here. And so just want to break down a couple different things that I've learned along the way to help do create a very like just a well-rounded class where you kind of touch on everything. One of my personal peeves in like a power class is just feeling like you're doing a lot of movement, but it doesn't necessarily touch on everything, or just kind of feels like maybe something was missing at the end of class. Like I don't know, maybe I wish I would have gotten more balancing postures or a little more for my hips or a heart opener. And so my experience from creating a well-rounded class comes from two kind of different places beyond just the teacher training that I did. And one was involved with, I taught with Core Power Yoga. In the States, they're a national chain. But what they do really well is they kind of give teachers a framework and just more so touch on these different things for your classes to create that sort of well-rounded experience that I've found very beneficial. And it's also sort of similarly based off of, if you're familiar with a Baptiste class, the Journey in a Power sequence, very similar in the sense that you're still going to be touching on everything, and they kind of just like mix around some of the different elements that they use. Um, and so anytime I've left any of those classes, at least I feel like, all right, cool, I touched on a little bit of everything. And then it just depends on the teacher and what they want to, how they want to use that structure to deliver their class. And so a couple different styles that I've personally come across, and not to say that this is the extent of them, but obviously there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can teach a yoga class. But the three, is it three? Yeah, three or four main ones that I've come across are, one is kind of a free flow. And so with this, a teacher will create a sequence and sort of guide you through the sequence maybe once or twice and really break things down and then kind of set you loose so that way you can go at it on your own. And so it'd be like, let's say we're going to do a sun A, and it can be basic, um, or they could add some different variations and elements to it. Um, but sort of guide you through it and then maybe say, hey, go through this sequence uh, three times on your own, or you've got the next 3 minutes to do your own thing. And if you want to add different elements or different postures or movements, feel free to add it, and then we'll kind of come together and move on. And so they'll maybe do that a couple times throughout the class, maybe for a bulk of the class using or creating just a little longer of a sequence. Another one will be a ladder flow. And so each time you're moving through the sequence, kind of just adding on a new element. So let's say for a sun A, you just start first time through coming to the top of your mat, taking your mountain pose, moving through your vinyasa. Second time coming through it, let's say you come back to your mountain pose, and this time you're going to grab your wrists and take a side body stretch. Come up, take it to the other side, and then back to your mountain pose, move through your flow. Third time through, let's say you're taking the side body stretch after your mountain, both sides, and come back up. And let's say this time you're adding on to a back bend and back up into your mountain, then moving through your vinyasa. And doing the same thing with your sun B. So that way, just each time you're kind of just building onto it, creating a little more movement. And then a progressive flow. And so this one is kind of, let's say you're taking, you're moving through the same sequence, but each time you're going through it, you're kind of adding a deeper expression. So let's say you're trying to get people into a bind from your side angle pose. So let's say the first time through it, you're just going to take your regular side angle pose, okay? Move through your flow. Next time through, you're going to take a half bind. So bringing your arm around your back, still think of stacking your shoulders, still think of stacking your hips, but just adding that different element and then moving through your flow. Then third time through, it's like, all right, cool. You can either stay with your half bind, you can stay with the regular variation, or if you want, maybe working towards a full bind. And so that way, every time it's just a little different. And for students who don't know, let's say, a deeper expression of a pose, this is kind of a good way to slowly introduce that. So that way they can stop at a level that's accessible to them. And if they're able to move further, they can continue on further. And so, yeah, so those are a couple different things, or at least different styles, along with just I guess another thing to consider would be if you want to guide your class into a peak posture. And I know, at least from what I recall from my 200-hour training, is that really trying to work your way backwards. So thinking of a pose and what needs to happen along the way for your body to be prepped and ready for it. And so taking kind of your sun A and then your sun B, and then creating those different elements. So let's say it was say you want to teach crow pose. All right, so for crow pose, you want to get the wrists warm up. So maybe at the beginning of your class, if you're moving through a few rounds of cat-cow, maybe doing a couple different wrist stretches. So you can either come onto the tops of your hands, stretch the back side of your arms. You can turn your hands in towards one another, rock side to side. Or even just shaking your hands out or doing different things to where you can work your wrists, get those warmed up. And then I try to think of if I'm teaching a pinnacle posture or a peak pose, how can I teach that in a variety of ways? So that way, once people get to it, it's kind of like, oh, okay, we've experienced this in a different way. So for crow, for example, let's say you're taking people on your back and you're in a boat pose. So from your boat pose, taking like chaturanga arms and then bringing, I wasn't expecting to do this right here, but we're going to do it. All right. So taking your boat pose and then bringing your knees to your triceps and then here flexing your wrist. So you've got your chaturanga arms, but then this will help people notice like the engagement in their core. And so this way that helps them be like, okay, cool. So when I'm on my hands, this is how I want to feel my core. Because especially something like crow, a lot of times when we're just getting familiar with the posture, we're really pressing our knees down into our triceps. And so sometimes that'll cause bruising or it'll just be a little more uncomfortable. But as you get more familiar with the posture, then you're engaging your core more and you're thinking more of that lifting motion of your hips as opposed to pressing your knees down. And so that's going to come just with more practice and more time as people become more familiar with their bodies. So that would be like one demonstration of the pose. Another way would be, I like taking it from let's say chair pose, and then from your chair, just moving into a drinking bird. So sweeping your hands back and then coming onto your tiptoes. And from here, taking your hands forward, flexing your wrists. And now you can lower your hips to your heels while you're on your tiptoes and then bring your triceps again to your knees. So this way you don't necessarily need to bring your hands to the floor, but you're still getting comfortable with, okay, this is where my arms go. This is how my hands are. This is how it feels in the core. And then from there, you can bring your hands down to the mat and either staying on your toes. And so that just gives people a different experience too of the posture. And so so that's just one way that at least I personally like to do it. Another example would be, let's say I was teaching hurdler pose. You could teach that lying on your back And then just being on your back and being like, okay, take your chaturanga arms. Now bring your thigh to your tricep. And now you're using that as a shelf. Okay, so now just feeling it. Okay, that's on your back. And in your mountain pose, if I was teaching it in the sequence, I would go for mountain and take your chaturanga arms. And then now from here, bring your thigh again to your tricep. So now you're getting that core engagement. Now you're focused on pressing your arm into your leg into your arm. And then from there, going up and maybe taking it to the other side. And that's just a different variation of the pose. So another way to show a more modified variation, what I would do would be, let's say in your tabletop, taking some hip circles, warming up the hips, warming up the joints, and then maybe bringing your knee to your tricep and then stepping back. And then I would introduce that in the flow. So the most modified variation would be having your knee down and then hands on the floor from your tabletop. And in the flow, say we're taking our plank pose or a three-legged dog, and then in a power class, I'd bring my knee to the tricep, just getting people to engage their body a little more. And then second time through the flow in kind of a more progressive style, taking chaturanga arms and now bringing your knee to your tricep. And then third time through, bringing your knee to your tricep. Now, if you want to lower your knee, or if you want, maybe tuck your toes, step back and try floating your back leg and then extend out through the crown of your head. That's how you're starting to play with that balancing motion. But it just slowly, again, introduces it over time. So those are at least the way I think of creating like a peak posture in a sequence. And so when creating a sequence overall, just some good advice is just to keep it simple. There's no need to overcomplicate it. Use movements and anything that you're familiar with, that you feel more comfortable with. Not saying like don't explore trying something new, because obviously we need to do that. That's the only way we're going to learn. But not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel like every single time. It's like build, get familiar and comfortable with your structure and how postures work together, what feels good together. And then from there, it's kind of like a puzzle where, all right, I know that a warrior one to a back bend is easy to get into like a pyramid pose. And it's like I can take my hands high, I can straighten my front leg, and then everything's all in position. And from there, I can go down to a pyramid pose. So those movements feel really good together. And then if I've already done some twisting and that's warmed up, then from there, I can take it to a revolved pyramid and open up. And then from there, it's easy to go into like a low lunge and then step back to your plank to move through your flow. So keeping it simple. If you're creating a longer sequence, I'd recommend less than 8 movements, just so it's easy to follow. You're not having to remember so much stuff or be looking at notes if you take notes, or if you plan it out. And then it's also easier for the students to grasp, as opposed to them just getting confused and wondering like what's happening. And if there's say you are exploring a new transition or teaching a new posture, I would just recommend giving a demo beforehand, so that way students kind of know what to expect or what'll be coming, as opposed to just completely catching everyone off guard, especially if it's something that you've never taught before. And if you are trying new movements, definitely play with it on your own before going into the class. To be like, I know there's plenty of times where I was like, oh, this might feel good. And in my mind, it feels good. And then I get into the studio and I try teaching. I'm like, well, that was not how I expected. Or just because I'm more familiar with my body and what I can do, it's totally different than maybe where other people are at. And it might not be accessible. So then just got to reevaluate it and then make tweaks along the way. And so a good structure, and I'll place all this in the comments. I'll put a little like recap that'll kind of break all this stuff down. So at least for me, the structure that I like working with, and just keep in mind, again, feel free to move things around. These are just different things that I like to touch on to give class a more well-rounded feel to it. And so definitely keeping a warm up, introducing, maybe if you're going to be doing a lot of twisting from your tabletop, you can thread the needle. So that way you're already starting to get the twisting motions. If you're going to be doing a lot of back bends, be on a child's pose, maybe having a puppy pose after a few rounds of cat-cow, so that way you're really starting to open and prepare the chest. And even in something like your down dog, if you're going to do side body stretches, coming up onto your tiptoes and then rocking your heels right or left, so that way you're preparing your body for more side body opening. And if you want to introduce some twists, even in your down dog, maybe taking your right hand to your left ankle And really think about that pulling action. So you're opening and you're stretching and you're twisting and then alternating side to side. Um, in your Sun A, um, creating whatever movements you want. Um, Maybe doing it 3 to 5 times depending on what you want to do during your class. And a Sun B, same thing, 2 to 3 times, or however many you need to. A Sun B plus would be, so like let's say you were teaching side angle, and the first couple times through your flow, you're just moving through it, you're just touching on it. And the third time through, it's like maybe adding on a little bit to the sequence to give it a little more umph, a little more power. Um, so if you were taking side angle, maybe holding it for 7 breaths and giving people the opportunity, if they've got it in their practice, to go to a half bind, to go to a full bind, to take it a birds of paradise, to take it a bound half moon. Um, and then from there, moving again through your sequence. And typically, something like what I would add on would be at the end of that Sun B plus flow, would be kind of, instead of just stepping back and moving through your vinyasa, be like throwing a wild thing and then take it to the other side, do a side plank for a 5 to 7 count or something like that, and then move through your flow and repeat it on the other side. And then a Sun B or a Sun C would be just creating another sequence, but I like to keep some of the movements similar to the Sun B, so it's not something totally new that either they weren't expecting, but just adding some different variations. So if in Sun B I was doing, let's say, side angle, and the Sun C I would do a triangle instead. So I was just opening different parts of the body. And from there, throwing in and doing that one or two times, maybe doing a little longer holds as opposed to a quicker moving, the way I would probably do a Sun A or Sun B. Um, and whenever you can, giving an opportunity for arm balances or for inversions. It doesn't need to be anything super complex. I mean, the students who are more advanced might take that opportunity to go somewhere further. But the students aren't there, at least it gives you an opportunity to like break it down and slowly introduce crow pose or side crow. Or if people have, or even just doing like a wide leg forward fold, something where they can spend a little more time in trying stuff out. Really including balancing and standing poses. So eagle, tree, dancer, standing bow pulling pose, single leg raise, just different kinds of things like that that you can incorporate into, you can either incorporate it into the flows, or you can maybe just do a standalone section to give people a break in between like your Sun B, your Sun C. And then a spinal strengthening section. So either doing things like low cobras or locust pose, just to prepare you for a bigger back bend towards like the later end of class. So something, whether it's camel, bridge, taking a full wheel, or like a flip dog, something like that. And then definitely an opportunity to get into your hips. So if that is pigeon pose, full pigeon, or giant planks, hips, do stuff for your hips. And then towards the end, to wrap things up, a surrender series. So something like legs up the wall, supine twists, shoulder stand, happy baby, headstand if people got it. And then just something to really slow things down before getting into your Savasana. And so, yeah, so like I was saying, those that structure is just a good framework that kind of, if you touch on all those things, it'll create a very well-rounded class, where it doesn't feel like necessarily anything's missing from your class. And with that, it really gives you like the freedom to, your Sun A doesn't necessarily need to be mountain to forward fold. Sometimes in my class, what I'll do is maybe just starting with like a low lunge and then taking it to a crescent moon with my back knee grounded. And then I'll do a little sequence from there, maybe a back bend, and then back into a crescent moon and into a half split. And from a half split, I can take it into like a twist. and then bring it back down into my low lunge. I'll move through that a couple times and then move through a vinyasa, and then I'll take it to the other side. And so that'll be my sun A instead of moving through a mountain uh, pose. And so for a sun B, so example, like what I'm teaching now, that'll be like my sun A. And then my sun B will be warrior one to a mountain pose, or to a back bend, back to a warrior one with a straight front leg, taking it to pyramid, and then from pyramid to a revolve pyramid, and then back to a low lunge. So that way those movements are just a different variation from what we were doing on our knee. So that way the body's prepared for a deeper expression. And so for my sun C, what I would do with that, or I'll give you for the sun B plus. So what I would do with that is been working a lot of the IT band and a lot of that twist. And with that twist, I would step back into a plank, holding whatever foot's forward. I would keep that leg elevated and then work into a side plank, hold that for a moment, and then take that top leg behind you for a while thing. So that way you're still lifting your hip, you're getting strong here in that arm, you're engaging your core, body's prepped for it. And from there, taking your flow all the way through. And then what I would do for the sun C, in that case, would be an extended pyramid pose. So starting from a crescent lunge, back heel over your toes, front knee over your ankle, taking similar movements where you're taking the back bend and then straightening your front leg, reaching high. And from there, taking extended pyramid. From there, grounding your hand, taking an open twist. And now you've been prepped, you've been doing all those twists, you've been pressing through your hands. So then you'd be ready to take your peace fingers to your big toes. And if you're feeling open, opening out to the side for a different side plank variation. And then incorporating different movements to just kind of fill out the time. But that's kind of just a rough, quick example of at least the way that I'm kind of teaching a flow right now. And then so with that too, the class, everything's just getting a little more like deeper expression. So starting with a wild thing and then taking it to like a flip dog, giving people in that time. And then later on in the class, either doing a floor bow or doing a full wheel pose. Or even camel. So it's like, all right, cool, the body's ready for a bigger back bend, a deeper expression. And you're kind of like prepping them along the way. And so that is at least the structure that I like to work with, or at least the different things I want to keep in mind. Another thing I'll place in the comments, if you've never taken a class that's a Journey into Power sequence, a Baptiste style class, I'll place a picture of like the sequence that they use, and just keep in mind that is a 90-minute, it's scheduled for a 90-minute thing. And so typically what teachers do is they'll just eliminate. There's a lot of things that it says to do twice. Maybe doing that maybe doing that once or not doing it all together. So that way you can fit as much of it in as you can. But that just provides a good basic, like well-rounded class without adding too much variation. So it's very good to really familiarize with a lot of postures and to kind of just build strength and get familiar and comfortable with a power flow class. But then as the teacher, then it's like, all right, cool, here's the structure. How can I work with this structure to do something different, to add something new? So that way the students can start learning different things for their own personal practice. And the only gripe that I would say that I have with, well, it's not even a gripe, it's just for me personally, is like once, let's say one of the studios I teach at, most of the teachers teach this. And so for me, when I already know what's coming, I know they're going to do like 5 Sun A's, I know they're going to do like 5 Sun B's. And the style is kind of like always the same. It's always just from your down dog to a warrior one, back through your flow, warrior one opposite side, do your flow, and then like chair pose, flow. So when I know that stuff like that's coming, I mentally like check out. And it's just like, then I'm just going through the motions. My mind's like thinking about other stuff and my body's just kind of moving. And so when I start noticing like students kind of just checking out like that and they're just moving, that's where I'll kind of throw in something different just to kind of like keep people present, where it's like, all right, this time we're going to do a back bend. And then people are like, oh, okay, cool. Like now I got to pay attention, like something new is happening. I got to stay present. I got to be with what we're doing. And yeah, I think that the way your yoga flow contribute or teaches you in your teacher training is just very much like, how can we make this class or make your practice, your class accessible to the most amount of people, which I feel has really benefited my teaching. And so it's nice to keep that in mind as you're teaching these flows. So that way in your warm up, you can introduce stuff a little more accessibly. And then as you're moving on, just gradually getting, let's say, more advanced or just more evolved into a different posture. But it also just kind of sets people up to know, like, hey, I don't have to do this. Like, I can keep my knee on the ground, or I don't need to come off of my toes for crow pose. Like, I can keep my toes grounded. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the way I think about power flow classes. I mean, like I said, a chunk. I teach 14 classes a week right now, and 12 of them are power flows. And it's nice just having that structure because then you don't have to think about it. And as you teach more, just having, even on your own, think of it. I like to think about it, like I said, as a puzzle. So I know the movements that kind of already work together. And so if I'm trying to introduce a new movement or show students a new pose, I can kind of just tweak the structure that I play with a lot and just add those little things to prepare them for something else, for something like different, that maybe they haven't done before. And yeah, feel free to leave a comment if you have any other questions, and I'll get back to it. Otherwise, in the comments, I will post a recap just with the different kinds of styles of that I've come across for power flow classes, and then kind of the structure that I kind of base my practice or my classes off of, with a, I guess, as an example of a class that I would teach. And I'll also post a picture of the journey into power sequence. So that way, if that's something you just want to keep in your toolbox for maybe something that you'd like to teach, it's a great sequence. And it kind of, like I said, it touches on everything without being overly complicated. Yeah, so that is that. And I would just like to thank you all so much for your time. Happy teaching, happy practicing, and yeah, just very grateful to be able to do this. Thank you.